Right now, we want to get into the situation in Venezuela. New York Times opinion columnist Tom Friedman's latest piece is titled, "If Trump doesn't bring democracy into Venezuela, he will never get much oil out of it." Tom Friedman himself joins us right now. And Tom, it is great to see you. We've been talking about this situation since it first evolved all week. Your take is that there's no way they can leave the previous administration and setup that is there and think that this is going to work. Why don't you lay out your views on this?
Well, first of all, Becky, thank you for sharing the story of your daughter. I didn't know that, and it was enormously powerful. And I'm wishing her great success as a science. Well, the situation basically is we removed Maduro, the president of Venezuela, the leader of basically a mafia regime, but we left the mafia regime in place. And now President Trump is basically saying we are taking over Venezuela's oil exports and production. And he'll be meeting with the major oil companies, American oil companies, tomorrow at the White House to get them to go in and begin exporting, rebuilding the infrastructure of Venezuela's oil sector and then exporting their oil. And the point I'm trying to make is if you're a major American oil company, if you're a Exxon or a Conoco or a Chevron's in Venezuela still in a limited way, Conoco and Exxon were their properties were expropriated. For them to go back, you need a legal structure. They need a new hydrocarbon law. They need assurances of any disputes will be settled by international arbitration. They need security. They need the rule of law. And the notion that we can decapitate this regime, leave the incredibly corrupt system that Maduro led behind with all the same people, and then say to our oil companies, hey, please come in and start pumping oil, I think that's an illusion. Our oil companies need a legal structure in order to operate there.
I think that's a very fair point. And I think it'd be difficult to convince them that that structure, first of all, is going to take place really quickly. Second of all, the idea that it would last past this administration or something beyond that. We're asking them to spend billions and billions, probably $10 billion a year to try and put the infrastructure back up. How could you possibly make some of those promises and make sure that they are lasting ones? Because you would need to be there for years in order to get that money back.
If you talk to the companies, Becky, they'll tell you, I mean, if they started tomorrow, it would probably take them 3 years to repair everything that's been destroyed in terms of Venezuela's economic infrastructure and then get it going. They could probably do about 500,000 barrels a day with low-hanging fruit, in a reasonable amount of time. But to really get it up to the capacity, it would take 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. That's the end of Trump's term. They would begin really exporting oil right when this administration would change. And when you look at the whipsaw nature of our regimes when it comes to our governments, when it comes to energy, these oil companies, I think, are going to be very, very wary.
There has been, though, Tom, real investor interest. We've spoken with other investors this week who are raising funds right now. They're not the majors, but some of them used to work for the majors, and they think that they can get a couple of $1 billion raised pretty quickly. And I guess that's the question. If we do have a plan to go in and rebuild the infrastructure in Venezuela, try and help the Venezuelan people with this as well, where does the money come from first?
Yeah, I mean, a couple $1 billion, that's probably about $98 billion less than the estimates are of what would be needed. So please tell the people raising those monies I'm not interested in their prospectus. I really think that the problem we are going to run into here is that we decapitated this regime, a terrible leader, but the leader of a terrible regime. We have now basically brought him to trial in New York, but we've decided, the Trump administration decided, to leave that terrible regime in place and not move to say to that regime, okay, we've gotten rid of your leader. We need a transition here. You have 6 months, 9 months to organize free and fair elections. That is a political context, I think, that would really be attractive to investors and give Venezuela a long-term path to restoration of its democracy.
Well,
But
that was implied, wasn't it, Tom, that that's the way you would do it, that the military wouldn't back Mikado. So they said, in the meantime, in lieu of an election, which we want in a year, I thought that was part of what the administration is pushing for at this point, because it would have been the military is behind for good or bad. The opposition party wouldn't have the support of the military. Then we'd be right back in the same place if there was a, what's it called? Is it a junta or something, Tom? You're well-versed in all that stuff.
Joe, you're raising an important point. I have not heard the president say that at all. I've not heard him use the word elections at all in terms of Venezuela. And this really gets to the problem. I saw this story unfold in Libya. I wrote about it last week when the President Obama and NATO, our NATO allies, decided to decapitate Gaddafi, but not put boots on the ground. And what happened basically was nature took its course there, and the country basically fell apart into civil war, and is still basically in a tribalized situation there. And so I think that's the danger in these kinds of situations where when you decapitate one of these regimes, but you don't put in place an alternative structure on the ground, you try to remote control it from afar. I think it's going to be really, really challenging.
Tom, politically, the idea that we may ultimately have to subsidize these oil companies to even go in there, and what kind of game of chicken might go on between some of these oil companies that are even contemplating it and what they may ask for. How do you think that plays back here in the U.S.? Because at some level, there's this unique paradox, which is if you're trying to lower the price of oil, which could be great for consumers to some degree, but by doing that, you could actually put some of these shale producers out of business at the same time.
Well, the Wall Street Journal today has a lead story that Trump wants to bring the price of oil down to $50 a barrel. For our majors, that's very problematic, and for the shale drillers, number. I mean, that's really close to break even for them. So Trump's political interest, which I think is to get the price of gasoline at the pump as low as possible for the midterms, is going to run up against the economic interests of the oil companies. And at the same time, they have a lot of opportunities around the world. These are also, they've got to report to their shareholders. And so if Trump says, well, let's say we're going to give you subsidies to go in, I mean, the amount of subsidies would have to be huge. And let's remember, ExxonMobil says it's owed $20 billion by Venezuela for the expropriation of its assets back in 2007. ConocoPhillips says it's owed $12 billion. So before they even go in, those debts, there's got to be a process at least in place for eliminating those debts. So my simple point is in the long run, and we're only less than a week into this, is that ultimately, if you want to see Venezuela, it's their oil, exploit their oil in a way that would be helpful to them and the world market, I think you need to move down the road toward free and fair elections. Let's remember the opposition won the last election by estimates by 70% of the vote. Joe is right. The people with the guns right now are not those people. And that's why this is going to be very complicated. Changing a country of 28 million people by remote control and just focusing on oil. I saw that play in Libya. It ended really badly.